When we see the headlines about a plane crash, it's easy to look for that one single reason why it happened. But the truth is, it's never that simple. Today, we're going to go beyond the black box recordings to understand the real, complex chain of events behind these disasters. Just imagine hearing that crackle over the radio. That was the last thing the pilots of a Northwest Airlines DC-9 heard, just 7 seconds before impact. But moments like this, as terrifying as they aren't the cause of a disaster. They're the final, fatal link in a long and often totally invisible chain of failures. So, how in the world do investigators even begin to make sense of a chain like that? Well, they use this brilliant metaphor that I think you'll find fascinating: the Swiss cheese catastrophe. Okay, so here's the Swiss cheese model. Picture multiple layers of safety, things like pilot training, air traffic control, maintenance procedures, and think of each one as a slice of Swiss cheese. Now, every layer has holes, right? These are just small individual weaknesses or errors. Normally, it's no big deal, because one slice of cheese blocks the holes in the one behind it. But what happens when all those holes line up just perfectly? Catastrophe finds a path straight through. The crash of Northwest 1482 is a textbook example of this model in action. Every single step you see here is a hole in another slice of cheese. First, you have thick fog. That's one hole. Then, a crew that was actually unfamiliar with their own airline's biggest hub, they get lost. That's another hole. You've got an overworked controller giving them really complex instructions. On top of that, critical runway lights weren't even working. You can see it, right? The holes were just lining up one after another. Finally, the lost DC-9 wanders right onto an active runway, directly into the path of a 727 that's taking off. It wasn't one single failure, it was a perfect storm. So system failures are one thing, but now let's go inside the cockpit, because the most unpredictable part of any complex system is always the human mind, especially when it's under enormous pressure. In that Northwest 1482 cockpit, you had a captain with thousands of hours of experience. But his first officer only had 185 hours on this particular plane and was still on probation. This creates what's called a steep authority gradient. Now, the first officer knew they were lost, but with that massive experience gap, he was hesitant to forcefully correct a veteran captain. And that hesitation? Yep, another hole in the cheese. And you know, simple miscommunication can be absolutely fatal. During the Tenerife disaster, the deadliest in aviation history, a KLM jet started its takeoff without getting clearance. At that exact same moment, a Pan Am jet on the very same runway radioed a warning. But because they transmitted at the same time, the two calls just canceled each other out, creating a high-pitched squeal in the KLM cockpit. The warning was never, ever heard. The mind itself can become a huge liability under pressure, leading to these dangerous cognitive traps. You see it with West Caribbean 708, where a fatigued captain experienced subtle incapacitation and completely misdiagnosed a stall as a dual engine failure. Or on Air Transat 211, a pilot fell for this somadrivic illusion. Basically, the feeling of acceleration felt like the plane was pitching up, so he pushed the nose down into a dive. And with Ethiopian 409, a task-saturated captain just got overwhelmed and lost his instrument scan completely. Look, these aren't simple mistakes. This is the brain literally failing under impossible stress. But you know, this chain of failure often starts long, long before the plane even thinks about leaving the gate. So let's zoom out from the cockpit and look at the cracks in the system itself, the organizational failures that really set the stage for disaster. What does a completely broken safety culture look like? It looks like this number, 19. That is the number of unauthorized passengers that were found on a previous Aerosucher cargo flight that crashed. I mean, think about that. When an airline is willing to ignore a rule that fundamental, it's not just a single hole in the cheese, the entire slice is rotten. And this is not some isolated problem either. All of these examples point to the same root cause: a culture of negligence. You had Soria Airlines with untrained mechanics loading planes. You had ValueJet, which outsourced its maintenance to this complex web of contractors just to cut costs. West Caribbean was literally too broke to pay its safety fines. And Aerosucre? They were routinely flying the wrong type of plane into an airport, and regulators just rubber-stamped it. Every one of these was an accident just waiting to happen. Let's trace one of these systemic failures from beginning to end. This timeline shows the fatal journey of the oxygen generators that doomed ValueJet Flight 592. It starts with mechanics removing old generators, but they don't have the required safety caps for them. So they get packed into cardboard boxes, then dangerously mislabeled as empty colmat, which just means company materials. Finally, they were loaded into a cargo hold that had no fire suppression system at all. The moment one of those generators accidentally activated, the fate of Flight 592 was sealed. Sometimes the failure is just a single tiny part. Days before the fatal crash of Air France Flight 4590, the Concorde was in for maintenance. Investigators later discovered a crucial wheel spacer it was just missing. It just goes to show you that in a system as incredibly complex as a supersonic jet, even a small maintenance mistake can have absolutely catastrophic consequences. Okay, I know this all sounds terrifying, but there is a crucial, really positive side to this whole story. Every single tragedy, every investigation, it becomes a lesson. The aviation industry is literally forged in fire, and these hard-earned lessons are exactly what make flying so incredibly safe for all of us today. Let's take the Tenerife disaster. Before that crash, a pilot might say something like, "We are at takeoff," which could mean we're at the takeoff position. But you can see how it could be misinterpreted as "we are taking off." Now look at the change. After Tenerife, the word takeoff is sacred. It is only ever used by a controller giving a takeoff clearance or a pilot reading it back. No more ambiguity, period. And the results of this learning process, they're undeniable. This chart shows the global fatal accident rate per million flights. Just look at the 1970s, and then look at today. The drop is absolutely staggering. And why? It's because the lessons from disasters like Tenerife, ValueJet, and so many others were turned into concrete, real-world changes. So what are some of those changes? Well, Crew Resource Management, or CRM, was developed specifically to flatten that dangerous authority gradient we talked about in the cockpit. The ValueJet crash, that led directly to mandatory smoke detectors and fire suppression systems in cargo holds. After the Concorde disaster, fuel tanks were lined with Kevlar and tires were redesigned to be burst-resistant. Every single item on this list is a direct result of a tragedy. So here's the key takeaway from all of this. The next time you step on a plane, just remember that your safety is no accident. It is a structure, and it's built on a foundation of hard-earned and often tragic lessons. Flying is as safe as it is today because of what we learned from the days when it wasn't. But the work is never really done. The goal in aviation isn't just to be safe, it's to become ever safer. And that leaves us with one final question to think about. What is the next hidden failure, the next hole in the cheese, that we need to find and fix before another tragedy has to teach us the lesson?